What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the SMGs and where they currently sit in the game, and all the different situations where different SMGs will win, and basically just giving recommendations for when to use which ones. And at the end of the video, I'll give recommended builds for the top SMGs that I decide are the best ones from this video. So we'll jump into it here in a second, but as always, if you guys like the channel, you like the website, consider dropping a sub, a like, a comment. It really helps us grow and helps keep the website live and helps us keep the website up to date. So let's jump into it and we'll talk about the top SMGs. I've talked about this a million times before, but I'm just going to reiterate because I'm sure there's some new people here. But in the SMG range, so inside, 15-20 meters, something like that, where you're going to be using an SMG a lot, really the most important thing is pretty much mobility, ADS time, sprint to fire time, and TTK. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about TTK just because all the SMGs have the same sprint to fire time. The SMGs are all relatively close in movement speed. The Modern Warfare guns are quite a bit slower, but they're still usable. So really the differentiating factor between a lot of these SMGs is the time to kill. So that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, and we'll mention the other things as well, but I'm going to focus on the time to kill mostly. So I've basically built what I view as the 7 best SMGs currently in the game, and then I also added the XM4 on there just because I think that's basically the best SMG AR that you can build right now, pretty much. So we'll talk about that as well. This is a 250 health chest shot TTK chart. So right off the bat, we'll talk about the Cold War MP5. So the Cold War MP5 is the best TTK of any SMG right now. It's down at less than 500 milliseconds, which is pretty crazy. And it has pretty short range. And if you've ever used this gun, it has just crazy amounts of recoil. Straight vertical though, so it's somewhat easy to control. It goes straight vertical for like 15 shots or so, and then it just stops and there's no more recoil. So it's really weird to control. It is a hard gun to use. But if you're rushing buildings, inside that 9-10 meter mark, it's going to be pretty much unbeatable. And up that close, the high amount of recoil doesn't matter that much anyway. So in the rushing buildings and things like that, the Cold War MP5 is an absolutely top tier choice. But I want to mention before I go any further, Akimbo M19s pretty much fry everything inside 10 meters. So you can just get Ghost right off the bat and do Akimbo M19s. I'll put a build for Akimbo M19s in this video as well. They just absolutely shred people. They're kind of way too good. It hasn't had a lot of focus brought to it, I don't think, but they're not super fun to use, and they don't have any range at all. After that, about 15 meters, you pretty much are going to lose just because you can't ADS with them. But they're ridiculously good inside 10 or 15 meters, and it makes it so you can really just pick up Ghost on your first loadout and get Akimbo M19s or Akimbo Renettis. They're almost identical in terms of how good they are. So I'll talk about that later on when we do the builds, but I just wanted to mention that Cold War MP5 is great inside 9 or 10 meters, but Akimbo M19s might actually beat the Cold War MP5 in that range a lot of the time. So that's just something interesting. So you can get a 50 round mag on the Cold War MP5, which is great. The Fennec has a much smaller magazine and shoots super fast. So the Fennec's the next up is cyan color. It has a great TTK. It's very, very close to being as fast as the Cold War MP5. But it has really slow bullet velocity, and it's Modern Warfare gun, so it has worse mobility and movement and strafe speed and all that kind of stuff. But the Fennec is still a fantastic choice for solos and duos. It kills super, super fast. It's a really, really good gun. Really easy to control too. It doesn't have that much recoil, and it shoots like I said, so fast that it just flinches the enemy a ton. So it really is a great choice for solos and duos. Then next up we have the Modern Warfare MP5. So it's got slightly more range than the Cold War MP5, much easier to control recoil than the Cold War MP5, and it's the third fastest TTK of all the SMGs, so it's sitting in a great spot right now. I think it is definitely an S tier choice, just because it's easy to control, comparatively speaking at least, and has really, really good TTKs still. And like I said, it's a Modern Warfare gun, so it's going to have a little slower movement, slower mobility, but not so dramatically so that you can't use it. I think it's still an S tier choice, even with the slightly worse mobility. And then next up after that, we have the Bullfrog. So this is the newest up-to-date data on the Bullfrog. So this magenta line here is the Bullfrog. Bullfrog's fantastic inside 15 meters in that first drop off. It's very easy to control, has a huge magazine, has Cold War mobility. But something that's interesting about it is you'll see after that first drop off, it's pretty much worse than everything. So it's only really good inside 15 meters. As soon as you go beyond that, which sometimes you're going to have your SMG out, and I'd say a lot of the time I'm trying to use an SMG out to 20, 25 meters in certain situations, depending on what my main AR is. So the Bullfrog is fantastic, like I said, inside 15 meters, but it just shoots marshmallows after that 15 meter mark. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's in a good spot. It's balanced well, where it's really good inside that and then bad outside that. So there's other options we'll talk about here in a second that are just better all around. And keep in mind, this is only chest shots. We'll look at some extremity shots and leg shots and stomach shots as well here in a little bit. But next up is this dark, I don't know what color that is, dark green, dark gray, greenish gray, I don't know. That's the XM4 actually. So this is an AR, but because it's a Cold War AR, it has good mobility. It's not going to be as good as a Cold War SMG, but it's relatively close to like a Modern Warfare SMG. You can still use the Raider stock. The Raider stocks are still super good. They're just kind of balanced where they should be now. It still feels like you're flying when you shoot. Obviously it was nerfed pretty heavily, but still really good. So you can see it has pretty good TTKs all across the board. And again, when we look at extremity shots, you're going to see the XM4 is going to beat pretty much everything on extremity shots because it has that consistent 5.56 damage profile where it does the same to the chest, stomach, and legs, whereas SMGs all have different profiles for, I believe some of them have stomach multipliers, some of them have leg multipliers. So in those cases, the XM4 is going to take over, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But next up after the XM4 is the MAC-10. They basically have the same TTK. MAC-10 is this orange line. So it's super good out to 15.5 meters. It's a little bit slower than the XM4, quite a bit slower than the Bullfrog, a lot slower than Modern Warfare MP5, and a lot slower than the Cold War MP5 and Fennec. But it's in a good spot where it doesn't have that horrible drop-off that the Bullfrog has. So it's much better. I'd say the MAC-10 is better as like a sniper support than the Bullfrog, just because the Bullfrog, just after that 15 meter mark, is almost useless. Like, it's just not good at all. But the MAC-10 actually maintains a decent TTK all the way out. It's not great. It's never going to keep up with like an XM4, which is why I never use SMGs as my sniper complement. But I know some people like to for mobility reasons and sprint to fire reasons. So if you're that kind of player, I think the MAC-10 is probably the best sniper support choice right now. Maybe the LC-10. It's a similar idea with the LC-10. So we'll go to the next gun now. PPSh is also a fantastic sniper support choice. It's just a tiny bit slower. They kind of removed the open bolt delay in this most recent patch from the PPSh. So this brown line is PPSh. Just a tiny bit slower time to kill than the MAC-10, but it maintains a very good TTK all the way out. It's basically like an AR. So it basically looks like the XM4. This brown line goes all the way out. It's always a fast time to kill gun all the way out. So it's a really good sniper support gun. And again, one of the best. I think MAC-10, PPSh, and LC-10 are the three best sniper supports. Probably PPSh is what I would recommend, just because it maintains that TTK so well for so long. Just like an AR, just like the XM4. But I would still personally use the XM4 or something like that. The FAR, those are both great choices. Cold War AK is a fantastic choice as well. But if you're one of the people that loves SMG mobility and loves good sprint to fire times and things like that, I think the PPSh is probably the best sniper support SMG right now. And then let's talk about the LC-10 real fast. So the LC-10 has a little bit more range than the PPSh for the first drop off. So really, it has a good TTK out to 20 meters, slightly slower than PPSh, but it has 3 extra meters of range. And then out to 26 meters. So basically from 17 to 20, the PPSh loses, but everywhere else it beats the LC-10. So that's why I think the PPSh is probably a little bit better sniper support, because it's such a small little gap of area there, 3 meters, where the LC-10 is going to win. They're both pretty easy to control. Both have good movement, mobility. So they're very similar, except that little 3 meter difference there. And the LC-10 has this third drop off that dramatically makes it kill slower at range past 26 meters, which most of the time you're not going to be using there, but sometimes you might. So that's kind of where these guns all sit. I think we'll jump into some builds for what I think are the best SMGs now, and I'll show you what I think about how to build these guns. Really quickly before we jump into builds though, I wanted to talk about extremity shots. So this is leg shots, 250 health still. And this is where the XM4 takes over because, like I said, the XM4 has the same damage profile for chest, stomach, legs. So it does the same damage to all those. So pretty much it beats everything now except the Cold War MP5. So the green line's the Cold War MP5. That will win inside 9 meters on leg shots. But then the XM4 wins everywhere else. And again, I think the it looks like the PPSh, the brown line, would be probably the second best sniper support behind the XM4. So basically, let's just turn everything off except the XM4 and the PPSh. So basically, these lines are kind of hard to see, but trade-off is with PPSh, you're going to get better movement, better sprint to fire times, better hip fire. And with the XM4, you're going to get just better TTKs. You still have pretty good mobility, but not quite as good as the PPSh. So they're both good options. I personally use ARs with sniper rifles, but I know some people really like to use SMGs. And I think the PPSh is now the #1 sniper support SMG that you could use. All right, we're going to start with the PPSh, which I think is, like I said, pretty much the best sniper support SMG right now. So there's a couple different ways you can build this. If you're running it with a sniper, which I think is where it shines, I'm not sure it would be great to use outside of that. It's not bad. It's never bad anymore now that they've given it that buff, but it just really would shine in like a sniper support role. So the first way to build it we're going to talk about is a non-hipfire build, building it more like an AR. So what you do here is Groove Suppressor for bullet velocity damage range, Spetsnaz grip for recoil control, so when you need to shoot somebody that's 30 meters away, you're more accurate. 55 round drum, just because using one of these faster mags or bigger mags is really going to slow your ADS time down, which we don't really want to do. And 55 bullets is plenty with this gun, so I think that's probably the best option. Raider stock, this makes you really good up close still. Again, it ruins your hip fire. It's going to make your hip fire horrible, but it's really going to make your ADS firing up close really good, which is an awesome option. And then because we're using it with a sniper, I would use the mill stop or another 1.37x scope. You could use the snap point even if you wanted a little more zoom. Microflex is the least zoom in the game at 1.25x. So for true SMG builds, we're using it only up close. Microflex is probably the way to go, but if you're using it with a sniper, then you might want a little bit more zoom for engagements that are a little bit longer. So I really like the mill stop. I use the mill stop for pretty much all of my sniper support builds. So this is the first build. This would work really well with a sniper. And then if you wanted to give it more of a SMG feel, I still would recommend using it with sniper, but you could pop on the bruiser grip. This is going to give you movement speed and hip fire. And then we're going to take off the Raider stock because that kills the hip fire. So this is for people that like to hip fire. I know I like to hip fire personally, so you could build it like this if you wanted to do that. You could use the Ember sighting point, which would hurt your sprint to fire time and your ADS time, but it would give you a little bit more damage range and help your hip fire. There's a bunch of different options here. I think the laser is the way to go though. You can go Tiger Team Spotlight if you want maximum movement speed with that bruiser grip, which would be really nice. This gives you both movement and ADS movement, which is really nice. And then the 5mW laser is going to give you the best hip fire. So if you really want to hip fire this gun, 5mW is probably the way to go. So those are the three probably top options to fill with this. Most of the time, me personally, I would probably use the 5mW, either the 5mW or the Tiger Team Spotlight. I don't really like the Ember because it's just, I don't really feel like I need that extra damage range. It was something like 8%, I believe, when I measured it with the SMGs, which is something, but it's just like, I don't really feel like that's worth it for the sprint to fire time penalty and the ADS penalty. So if I want to be really fast, I'm going to use the Tiger Team. If I want to have really good hip fire, I'm going to use the 5mW laser. So those would be my two recommended builds for the PPSh. All right, on to the Cold War MP5. Cold War MP5 is a little bit of a tricky beast. It's very, very difficult to control the recoil out past 10 or 15 meters. So this is the super speedy build that I made for the Mach 10, the Mach 10 as some people call it. Fastest movement speed in the game when you're sprinting. So you can essentially do this exact same build with any Cold War SMG. So I just wanted to highlight that here real fast with the Cold War MP5. It works well with the Cold War MP5, but it works well with all the SMGs. So Cold War MP5 is king of TTK, but it's hard to control. Basically with this build, with Agency, you're getting bullet velocity damage range, as always, a little bit of vertical recoil help. Control grip gives you insane sprinting movement speed. We use the 50 round drum instead of the fast mag because the reload time is not that much different. but the ADS time penalty is significantly less on the 50-round drum. Tiger Team Spotlight gives you movement speed and aimed walking movement speed, so makes you much faster again. And then Raider Stock, so this is not a hipfire build. You can't hipfire this at all. But I do think the Cold War MP5 is great for hipfire builds, so I'll talk about that in a second. But Raider Stock does what Raider Stock does, makes you shoot really fast, or move really fast while you're shooting, gives you great sprint to fire times, ADS movement speed. It's just a great attachment. Even after the nerfs, it's still a great attachment. But like I said, I think the Cold War MP5 is fantastic for hipfire builds. So for a hipfire build, we're going to remove Raider, swap over to Bruiser Grip, put on 5 milliwatt laser, and then the last attachment, you can kind of do what you want. You can put an optic on there. You could extend the damage range a little bit. Because you're hip firing it, you could throw the task force on there, but I really just don't recommend that, because if you put the task force barrel on the Cold War MP5, it just makes the recoil even worse when it's already bad. And even on a hip fire build, every now and then you're going to have to ADS. Every now and then somebody's going to be too far to hip fire. So I just really wouldn't recommend using the task force on this gun specifically. So probably rifled is what I would do if I was going to do a hip fire build. Just give myself as much damage range as I could. And none of the barrels hurt your hip fire on Cold War guns, so you can do that here. And then let's do like an ADS build for this. So for an ADS build where you're not going to be hip firing very much, I would potentially still use rifled, actually, just to get the most damage range possible. We swapped over to Field Agent to help with recoil. Take off 5 milliwatt. You could potentially use the Ember sighting point just to give you more damage range, because the Cold War MP5 has such short damage range, so that wouldn't be a terrible option doing that. But I think a good choice would be an optic as well, or the Raider Stock again. Raider Stock makes you zoomy, so that's a really good choice all the time, pretty much, just for mobility reasons. And then if you have a lot of trouble with the recoil on the Cold War MP5, you could swap to the SOCOM Eliminator. Actually, this really will help with your recoil and make it feel much more controllable. You lose that bullet velocity and you lose the damage range that the agency gives, and the agency gives you a little bit of recoil help anyway. So I don't know. I don't really know that I would use the SOCOM. I'd probably stick with the agency, but I think this would be a great build here. For ADSing, you could take Ember off, like I said, and do Raider Stock. This would be a really good build as well. But Cold War MP5 is great. It's just hard to use, but it's a cool gun because it kills so fast. But like I said, I think M19s with Ghost are almost as good of a choice. So I'm going to talk about that right after this. All right, so I keep mentioning Akimbo M19s. These things absolutely fry. If you have stopping power, especially, you kill people in a flash. It's pretty crazy. You pretty much will beat any SMG inside, I'd say, 8 or 9 meters. So, and you'll beat a lot of them outside that too. It's just inside that you almost will never lose. Sometimes you'll get really unlucky and your shots will miss because it's hipfire, but I mean, almost never will you lose inside probably like 9 meters with this. So you can do the exact same build with the Renettis without the burst perk. You use a Akimbo perk still, or without the burst barrel, I guess, for the Renettis. So literally the same build with the Renettis. They're almost identical. They do the same damage, basically the same fire rate, basically the same damage range. By the way, I did get all the damage profiles for pistols, so those will be coming to the site pretty soon. I'm not sure exactly when, but hopefully pretty soon. We've got all the data taken, just have to actually compile it and get it on the website. But yeah, this shreds. It's great out to like 15 meters even, but sometimes out at like 15 meters you will lose to an SMG if they hit good shots. But with this gun, you can obviously just get Ghost off your first loadout, and if you get like an all-round AR to go with this, it just works fantastic. It's probably one of the best loadouts in the game right now, is just to get a good all-round AR like Cold War AK, Farah, Stoner, something like that. Run that with Akimbo M19s, and you can just get Ghost on the first loadout and just hunt people, and it's really good. These are too good. The M19s are too good. The Renettis are too good. I think people don't use them because they like to have their second gun and they like to have the option to ADS. But these Akimbo M19s and Renettis are definitely overpowered for a lot of situations. All right, let's talk about the Fennec. So like I said, the Fennec is super good for solos, maybe duos. It just doesn't have a very big mag. It only has 40 round drum mag, and it shoots super fast, so you run out of ammo instantly. But that being said, in solos and duos, 40 rounds is usually going to be enough in fights, and sleight of hand will make you reload a little quicker. That's nice. So the ZLR Saber, is what I like to use rather than a barrel or rather than monolithic. Gives you a little bit more damage range. And if you use one of the barrels, basically any of the barrels that help with recoil control in Call of Duty from Modern Warfare, if they help with recoil, they massively hurt your hip fire. So it's something that's not listed, but it's something that's always been true. So that's why I don't like either of these barrels, because they both just ruin your hip fire, and I like to hip fire. Personal preference. If you're okay with not having good hip fire, then you could use one of those barrels. So this is basically a hip fire build here. No stock gives you better movement, gives you better hip fire. 5 milliwatt gives you much better sprint to fire time, much better hip fire. And not a whole lot else to say there. It's just it kills really fast. It's a very good gun. Very, very good for solos and duos. All right, Modern Warfare MP5. Very good TTKs, much easier to control than the Cold War MP5. So there's a few different builds you can do with this. I pretty much always recommend, first of all, for people that don't know, 10mm rounds don't actually increase damage or range. They don't do anything. I don't know why that is, but it is what it is. So 45 round mag is what you want to use. Sleight of hand, I pretty much always use sleight of hand on this. I think the reload time is pretty terrible, and 45 rounds isn't that many. So I think sleight of hand is really important to have. So those two pretty much will stay on for every build that I build, but then the other 3 attachment slots are kind of open. So this is a hipfire MP5 basically with suppression. So monolithic integral suppressor gives you a little bit more damage range than just the monolithic suppressor, just by a tiny bit, and it also removes tracers. So I prefer the monolithic integral over the regular monolithic suppressor. 5 milliwatt for sprint to fire times and fantastic hipfire. And then the collapsible stock, which is the same as no stock, so it's going to help your movement speed a lot, which is really important for Modern Warfare guns, especially because they're already slower than Cold War guns. They just don't have the mobility of Cold War guns. And I don't know why that is. I have a couple theories, but that might be a future video. But anyway, collapsible stock, no stock, better hip fire, better movement speed, things like that. Very important. So this is a good build just for hip fire and really good movement. Something else you can do that's pretty common is actually removing the monolithic integral. And you can pop on Merc foregrip to get yourself better recoil and better hip fire, because it also helps with hip fire. I don't know. It's a good build. I think being suppressed is more important than people think. There was that week where suppressors were broken in Warzone, and I just didn't run them because there was no reason to. And we got third-partied nonstop. And it genuinely felt like a different game. Like, you could just never finish a fight without being pushed by another aggressive team, and it made it really hard to stay alive. So I think suppressors are actually decently important. I know that's like somewhat totally depends on who you ask. Some people think suppressors aren't important, but I do. I think they're very important. So I personally would pretty much always want monolithic integral on my MP5, both for damage range and for the suppression. But if you wanted this to be more of a longer range MP5, this is going to be weird. A lot of people will think this is crazy, but Commando foregrip really stabilizes the MP5 and makes it much more accurate. Helps with visual recoil, helps with the bounce. I actually think it's a decent choice. You could leave the F-Tech collapsible on there if you wanted to keep that movement speed up, because Commando really hurts your mobility. That's one big downside to it. But when I ran it with the Commando, I usually took off the collapsible stock and put an optic on there. I would just put Solo Zero on there, and this just essentially made it more of a ADSing MP5, and it works really well. It's a good build. So those are the different things I'd recommend for the Modern Warfare MP5. It's really in a good spot right now. Definitely one of like the top 3 SMGs. All right, so my personal opinion on how to build the Bullfrog, because it is, like I talked about on the TTK charts, because it is significantly worse after that first drop off, after 15 meters, than pretty much all the other SMGs. I think you really want to extend that damage range as much as possible. So I think putting the Grew Suppressor and Task Force Barrel on there is the best option. That gives you the most range. Task Force gives more than Rifled. It does hurt your recoil, but the Bullfrog has very controllable recoil already, so I'm not really concerned with that. And it also helps with mobility, helps with your strafe speed and bullet velocity. So basically, Grew Suppressor, Task Force Barrel, I think is the way to go on the Mac, or on the Bullfrog, purely because of that TTK chart stuff, like I was talking about, where it's really bad after the first drop off. So this would be a non-hipfire build, because we've got the KGB Skeletal, which is essentially the Raider stock, gives you that firing movement speed and sprint fire time. but kills your hipfire. So this would be one way to build it, but if you still want a hipfire, then I just remove that stock and put on a 5 milliwatt. And I think those are pretty much the two best builds. For me personally, I have to use an optic on this thing. There's so many times where those bars that stick up on the side of the iron sights just get in the way, and I die because of it. I know some people can use them, but I personally can't. So this is what I think is best. I use microflex on it, and I think it works great. If you want a little more zoom, like I said, you can use mill stop, like if you're using this with a sniper or something. But again, I really wouldn't recommend it with a sniper. I think XM4 or PPSh would just be better options. Cold War AK is great as well. FAR is great. FFAR is still great. Ram 7's decent. It's just that it has that bad mobility from Modern Warfare guns. But I just think there's a lot better options to use with a sniper. So I think I'd use this as an SMG, and I think this is the build I would use. 65 round drum, or 65 round mag, just because 65 bullets is plenty, and we don't want to kill our ADS time or reload time with the 85 round mags. So I think 65 is plenty. You could pop on the Spetsnaz 85 if you're playing quads and you want to just never have to reload. That's not a bad option either, but I generally stick with the 65. All right, I know the XM4 isn't an SMG, obviously, but I think it works pretty well as one right now still, even after the Raider Pad nerf. So this right here would be one of the best builds, I think, for running it as an SMG. You get agency for bullet velocity damage range, task force bullet velocity damage range, and mobility. It gives you that strafe speed. Raider Pad gives you the insane shooting movement speed, and just general. You need the Raider Pad if you're going to run this as an SMG, because it gives you sprint to fire time that's more competitive with SMGs. And then I need an optic. Some people run this without an optic, but this is one of the guns that I just don't like the iron sights on, and I really think the optic helps. And then Stanag 60 round mag. This is just we're not using the fast mag for ADS reasons, so sticking with the 60 round mag. But this is just a great SMG. If you want better ADS times, you could swap agency for regular suppressor. That'll give you, 25 milliseconds. So I don't know the actual number, but something like that, probably 25 milliseconds or so better ADS times, which is important when you're competing with other SMGs. And if you want even faster ADS times still, take off task force. And I have new numbers on the wraps. Those will be going up on the site soon, but you want to use airborne now. It's a little bit better than serpent wrap in most cases. So we're going to use airborne. This is going to hurt our sprint to fire time a bunch, which is not good for an AR. So I'm not sure I would totally recommend this, but if you want really good ADS times, this will give you really good ADS times with your AR. But yeah, it's a great gun. I guess a quick note, if you're building it as a sniper support, I would probably go... this is my personal preference. I like to be a little bit more effective at range, so I'd probably use something like this with a mill stop. So field agent to help with recoil. Still Raider Pad, because Raider Pad just makes you much better up close and have better sprint to fire times and things. Mill stop for that little bit extra zoom. Agency for bullet velocity damage range, and then 60 round mag just because we need a 60 round mag. But this would be a really good sniper support that's both good up close and going to be pretty good out to 40 meters or so. So I think the XM4 is one of the best SMGs and up close ARs in the game right now. So I gave builds for the Bullfrog, the Fennec, Cold War MP5, Modern Warfare MP5, and PPSh, and XM4. I'm not going to talk about the MAC-10 or the LC-10. They're both good guns, and if you like them and you're good with them, go ahead, by all means, use them. You can use the same builds that I talked about with the other guns, so maybe my PPSh builds would work really well with a MAC-10 or an LC-10. The Cold War MP5 fast movement speed build that I showed is the same as my MAC-10 speed build that makes you move the fastest in the game. So if you want to use that on the MAC-10, it would work great as well. But really the overall meta for SMGs is in a pretty good spot right now. I still think ARs are a little bit too good, but it's pretty well balanced. So I'm pretty happy with where things are right now. There's a lot of different situations where different SMGs will beat other SMGs, and I think that's just a good spot for the meta to be. But I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I will see you guys all in the next one.